we go. Hey there, this is Jay Frost speaking to you, of course, on behalf of the Philanthropy Mastermind series. And I am sitting next to a friend, not just a personal friend, but a friend of the field. And I'm going to introduce her to you in a moment, so you just have to wait. But I am going to tell you a bit about how you can engage with us today, as well as where I am, because this is a really special occasion to meet with Karen Isble and talk about her work here at Kalamazoo College. Very exciting to be here, back here for me. But before we do any of that, of course, I want to welcome you back to the series. If you haven't been here before, welcome. If you have, it's great to have you back. And I want to encourage you to participate today. We can't see you or hear you, as you know, but we do want to hear from you. And that means that you have a couple ways to do that. The first is chat. So take a look for that, if you would, right now at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd be so kind to just let us know that you're here, we would really appreciate that. Just tell us where you're coming in from today, and maybe the institution, the state, whatever you feel like saying. Please do utilize the chat. Just open that up if you would. We'd really appreciate knowing that you're here. Also, we have the Q&A. The Q&A is right at the bottom of the page as well for you, and that's a perfect place to go ahead and pose the questions that occurred to you throughout, and that way we won't miss them. So if you do talk amongst yourselves in the chat, there's a chance that we'll miss your question. We don't want to. So please do utilize both throughout, and thank you for letting us know that you're here. Isabella, nice to see you. Good to see the rest of you. Please keep letting us know. Hello there, Maria. Well, with that, I do want to say one more thing, which is that this is, of course, brought to you by our friends at DonorSearch, but we don't talk about DonorSearch here unless Karen decides to do that for some reason. But that doesn't mean we don't care about them. We appreciate their support for this series, which goes back to 2016 and has had over 500 programs. And so if you want to know more about those programs, of course, just go over to the resources tab at DonorSearch.net, where you can learn about all of that and see those both there and on YouTube. But also, if you care about your donors, and I sure hope you do if you're in this field, then DonorSearch is a good place to look for learning more about them. So do take a look at DonorSearch if you would, and we'll tell you more about that at the conclusion of the program. So with that, Karen, thank you so much for hanging out, or for letting me hang out with you.
Absolutely. It's great to have you here on campus. I know you haven't gotten to do many of these live and in person.
No.
So I'm glad to be able to host you here on Kay's beautiful campus here on this not so beautiful fall day. It's a little wet, a little rainy, a little chilly, but beautiful nonetheless. So.
It's gorgeous here right now. I mean, coming into the campus, it's wet, but driving in, it's all the fall colors right here.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And now I know we need to tell people about you in detail, but tell us about K College for a second, for those who don't know it.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. A lot of people sometimes in other parts of the country go, Kalamazoo, is that a real place? I didn't realize that, in fact, there was a song from like the 30s. I got a gal in Kalamazoo, and I had a colleague once at another institution say, I thought it was just a song. I was like, no. And in fact, there is a t-shirt shop downtown Kalamazoo where you can get t-shirts that say, yes, there really is a Kalamazoo. So they must get that question pretty often. But yes, Kalamazoo College is one of the oldest colleges in the country. It was founded in 1833. So we're just about 11 years away from our bicentennial, which is exciting. It's a small private liberal arts college, formerly associated with the Baptist Church, but that hasn't been the case for a couple of decades. And we have about just under 1,400 students. We come from all over the country. We just welcomed a class of about 372 students at fall convocation, and we have students from 26 countries as well. So they come from all over.
Yeah, and they go all over too.
And they do. One of Kay's hallmark programs, which was started in the 60s, I know it's pretty commonplace now, was the institution of what we call the K Plan. And it involved sort of a tripartite, sort of rigorous academics combined with experiential learning, mostly in the form of internships and externships, as well as study abroad. And so study abroad is a big draw. About 80%, 70 to 80% of our students every year, our junior class, go abroad for either 1 term, 2 terms, or the whole year. And so for a lot of students who are looking for a really robust program, that is a big draw. In fact, even during the pandemic, when we were fully remote. We still had 5 students abroad over in, I think, Thailand and 1 in Europe. But last year, we brought that program fully back online. We had over 200 students study abroad last year when a lot of schools still hadn't restarted their program. So we're really proud of it, and our alumni ask about it all the time.
And international students here. So the same kind of dynamic where it seemed like there was not a shutdown of international students in the United States, but it really diminished. And but here, that's a part of the fabric of the place.
It is still a part of the fabric. We have a group that maybe we'll talk about later called our President Student Ambassadors, amazing group of students who work with us at public functions and presidential events. And one of them is from Mongolia. I was just sort of astounded. I said, when do you ever see your family? She's like, not very often, not surprisingly, but yeah, we have students from Africa, North and South America. I think we've got some folks from Australia, some kids from Australia, Europe certainly, and Asia. So,
really amazing. And I know that Kalamazoo is also known for many other things, but one of them that I remember from my student days, because I came here on campus, visiting colleges. The biggest mistake of my life was not going to Kalamazoo College, I'm sure. We both went to Michigan. So I say that, I love Michigan, but this place is really unique and special, is that at least at the time, it seemed like there were more people who went to Capitol Hill from Kalamazoo College, I think, as interns than any other college in the country at that time.
I'm not sure about that stat, but yes, we do have a very robust program in DC, and we have a lot of students who go into foreign service that study abroad, who have been ambassadors, things like that. So, yeah.
So for those who don't know your work, they may know you as a leader from the world of APRA, but you've been so involved in some of the major campaigns in the country, at least 2 multi-billion-dollar campaigns. Can you give us a little introduction to some of your work and then how you came to choose to be at Kalamazoo?
Absolutely. So I started my career in higher ed in prospect development at University of Michigan back in 2006, which just seems amazing. And in fact, I've been in 3 multi-billion-dollar campaigns because we were halfway through one when I first started at Michigan. The Michigan Difference campaign was about halfway through its course. That ended up raising about $3.2 billion. And several years later, I helped to do a lot of the feasibility and planning for launching the Victors for Michigan campaign, which ended up being $5.3 billion after I had left. And I left Michigan to go and work as campaign director at the University of California at Irvine and helped them launch a $2 billion campaign back in 2019. Sadly, right before the pandemic, I felt like a lot of that energy that we had sort of had a wet blanket thrown over it when 2020 came around, but they're doing well as well. And so coming here and making the transition to a small liberal arts college from these big research universities, I think first there was some skepticism, even during the interview process from, some of the advancement team here, from some of the trustees. Why, you've been at these big places, why would you want to come to a small place like Kalamazoo? And I always started with 2 things. First, when I started my career, I worked for a small arts organization. So my background is in the arts, and I worked for the Chamber Music Society of Detroit for 7 years before I moved over to University of Michigan. And during that time, we went from 2.5 staff to 5 staff. So I was very used to sort of working in a small organization where everybody wore a lot of hats, and you were very close to the end product, if you will. So I got to meet Yo-Yo Ma and Jesse Norman and, Daniel Barenboim and some amazing Branford Marsalis. So that was amazing because you were so close and you had that sort of immediate access to everything that you were working for. So that was actually part of the draw of coming to a place like Kalamazoo, where I knew I would have much greater opportunity to interact with students, with faculty, and be a little bit closer to the end product that we were busy raising money for. So,
and it got you back to Michigan.
Yes.
And there must be a benefit to that. So you worked there and you went to U of M. So are you a Michigander? Are you a native?
I am a native Michigander. I grew up in Detroit. I went to Harvard for undergrad, so I moved away for a few years, and then I came back to Michigan for grad school, and then moved to Chicago for a few years, came back to Michigan again. That's sort of been a pattern. Go away, come back, and certainly I was not necessarily intending after 3 years in Irvine to come back to Michigan, but the the draw of K was really strong. And I have to say, I have the most amazing boss ever. And that was to a person, every member of the senior staff who reports up to the president, he was one of the primary reasons we chose to come here. He's an amazing leader. So
right.
I feel very fortunate.
That's something we can dig into. And I know that if for those who are tuning in, part of the attraction of the conversation will be those differences between places. But knowing a bit about your history and how you came to make those decisions is also part of what makes that work, including the bosses you chose, not who chose you, because you made that decision. You were already having your success far away and chose to come back. There's another piece to that puzzle, which is, for those who don't know, that you have that tie to the arts that's so strong as well. So when you talk about those artists, from Yo-Yo Ma to Branford Marsalis, I mean, those are people. Jesse Norman, of course, maybe above all, those are people you'd personally appreciate because of your own background there. So
absolutely.
What can you talk a bit about that?
You mean the transition from the arts into higher ed?
Yeah.
That was more my practical side. I have 2 music degrees, and I studied at Michigan to be an opera singer, which, that's a dream far, far in the rear view mirror. And I moved to Chicago and did a lot of auditions and did some performing for several years while I was working first at the Goodman Theater in Chicago, then at the Chicago Symphony for 4 years. And before I realized I did not have the constitution of a starving artist. And so I moved into arts administration, which practical me, even when I was in grad school, I was taking courses on arts administration, so that I sort of had that in my hip pocket, and it served me well. And when I came to a point where I realized, after we moved back to Michigan and I was with Chamber Music Society of Detroit, that I had an opportunity to either sort of move into, try to move into an executive director role of an arts organization, or to move into another sector. And the practical side of me, who had 2 young kids at the time and all of that, was like, okay, I need really robust benefits. I need things that a lot of arts organizations are just not, they just don't have the resources to provide. And I honestly felt that there would just be more opportunity for me to grow and learn if I moved outside of the arts. And then I would get to enjoy the arts, because one of the things you can't do when you're working for a performing arts organization is to have a lot of time to perform yourself. So when I was at University of Michigan for 8 years, I got to sing with one of the choruses there, and we sang concerts with the Detroit Symphony multiple times a year, and that was fantastic. And I would never have had the time to do that working for an arts organization.
I can imagine. But it's interesting the way you also are highlighting that the lack of resources, and that's not always just because they don't have the audience, or the audience doesn't have money, or all these other things that people say. It's also that lack of infrastructure to raise money. And each of these places that you've talked about, since Michigan running that massive campaign, UCI, even the scale here, the team that you're leading here, in each of those cases, you're making a commitment which is scalable.
Yes.
Maybe that's a good place to begin the conversation about the differences. Can you talk about that a bit? I know it's hard to compare, especially over that timeline. It's a lot of stuff. But a place like Michigan or UCI, and the scale of that operation to raise that kind of money in comparison to the scale of a place like K?
Absolutely. It's interesting because I am still, 2 years in here at K, thinking about ways to take the things that I learned at both of those larger institutions and apply them to us. And some of them are applicable and some are not. I think the biggest difference is just certainly the number of resources. So when I was at University of Michigan, I oversaw our advancement services team, and I had a team of 60 to do all of those sort of infrastructure pieces.
Just advancement services?
Just advancement services. Okay. My whole advancement team, which includes alumni engagement, fundraising, and marketing and communications here at K, is 35. Right. So, just kind of recalibrating my brain around how can we do some of those, do that same work at scale.
Right.
But at a place like Michigan, where you have 600,000-700,000 living alumni, you need an operation that size to parse data. I'm a data person, that's my background. Yep. To think about how it was embarrassment of riches at Michigan in terms of their more living alumni than we were ever as an institution going to get to. And so that was fantastic. It also kept raising the stakes because we always knew that there was more out there. And some of the challenge always with these multi-billion-dollar campaigns is sort of how big do we go and how big do we get? And they are still growing. Right. And I know my colleagues at Michigan are thinking about what the next one is. I'll be anxious to see where they land, because there was always that fear of like, well, it becomes a little bit of an arms race in terms of thinking about some of those big campaigns. And even when I was at Irvine at UCI, some of the conversations around goal setting for the campaigns were about, well, what is the competition doing? We have to sort of keep up with the Joneses. I don't see as much of that here because I think, all the small liberal arts schools are scrapping. I certainly look at my peers, and I've met many of them, wonderful, wonderful colleagues from around the country who are further along than I think, than K is in the sophistication and the ability to bring in some of those larger dollars from their alumni bases, but I see that we have incredible potential here. What I've realized is that at the end of the day, regardless of whether you're raising $100 million or $1 billion, is when you get out of bed every morning, the work is still the same. The work to think about how do we analyze our donor pool to reach out, make sure we're reaching out to those with the most promise. The way we train our gift officers in how to engage those donors, both at the annual giving level, plan giving levels, major gift levels, principal gifts, that work is the same. And so really in that regard, not much has changed. It's really just thinking about how you take some of what might be more modest resources and apply them to that same work.
As you're talking about that though, and I'm also thinking as an alum of Michigan, which is a big place, and so choices have to be made even with that scale. And one of those is, how do you market all the things going on there to all the alumni all over the place? So you talk football. And even for those who were not football people, I went to one game in 4 years. It was too cold up there. That's not always the thing, when you went to the Hopwood Room more than you went to a stadium. But I can understand that issue because even if you have 300 people, what are you had total in development, or that you're dividing? I know it's not exact math, but 600,000 among 300. That's a really tough challenge versus if you've got 35 here and tens of thousands. That's a very different scale. Does that afford a place like Kalamazoo College a chance to get to know its alumni better, perhaps, than a place like Michigan?
Well, I have 5 major gift officers, so the scale is, it's about the same. And I would say, and Michigan, for the record, had about 600 folks working in advancement across the campus by the time I left there, and it seems like an immense number. But when you've got that much potential and that many disparate areas across campus, so you've got all of your academic units, and then you've got your centers and other what we call non-academic units, and you've got athletics, and you've got the health system. There's a lot of competition for getting the attention of those prospective donors. And so, yes, the work to try to do that matchmaking was really intense, to figure out what was the thing that was going to be the thing that brought that person in the door, because no, it's not going to be football for all of them, or the museum, or the whatever. Right. One of the attractions of coming to a place like K for me, and I actually talked about this a lot too during the interviews, and why you don't have all that competition. The focus here when we're doing our fundraising and carrying that message is students, faculty, staff, and the campus infrastructure. So, and programs certainly, but there's no competition with a museum or a health system or a massive research enterprise that are always sort of jockeying for attention. Yes, those are points of pride that certainly bring people in the door. And certainly a number of folks who give to K also give to Michigan. Michigan saved my life, the medical center, all that, whatever it may be. But it's really refreshing for me to be able to dig down and really talk about what it means to talk about philanthropy that is really just impacting students on a day-to-day basis.
And it sounds like that's a little bit different. Is that because the brand is understood differently? And there's a development part to that too, isn't there? I mean, about how we communicate that.
Yeah.
But if Michigan is many things to many people, and we're not attacking Michigan here.
I love Michigan.
We're just using it as a reference point. You could say this with any big place.
But any big, I mean, it was the same with Irvine too. I mean,
Right.
so I mean, it was just, again, you had a medical center, you had museums, you had a
Right.
lot of, there was just a lot of competition for our donors' attention.
Sure, that makes
Yeah.
sense, especially at a time like this,
Yeah.
where our attention is being pulled in so many different directions,
Right.
irrespective of that relationship with our alma maters. So when you're talking about the brand of Kalamazoo College, is it more holistically understood? So if we talk to an alum, that you can just talk about the students and that you're pretty much
Yeah.
you're there, you've reached their heart, because
Yeah.
that's always the issue. Is
It's the students or the
Getting through
faculty.
the
I mean,
rest.
so one of the things that a small place like K is that the relationships that our alums have been able to forge with faculty members that last their entire lives in many cases. A lot of folks will then create a research fund in honor of a favorite professor. We had one for a retiring history professor just last year, and folks who actually had never, they maybe talking about students wasn't really doing it for them, but like, oh my God, we want to name something in honor of this retired professor who changed my life as an alum. But people were coming in droves, and so I think one of the things that, as we think about our current campaign that we're in here at K and how we talk to our alums, if anything, K could probably differentiate a little bit more in its messaging. But at the same time, there is, yes, we raise money for athletics. 25% of our very small student body are student athletes, so, and that's not an area where the campus has been able to do a ton of investing on the programmatic side. We have some nice facilities. We could use some nicer ones, couldn't everybody? But, and
send in your check today.
and some of our alums who were football, baseball players, things like that, they're hammering home that we need to continue to support that. But at the end of the day, this campaign in particular, the Brighter Light campaign, which launched publicly last fall, is about building our endowment. And so we're looking to build our endowment, and that's in terms of direct student support, so scholarships, study abroad funds, research funds, because all of our students do a senior thesis project, senior research project, and sometimes they need funding for that. And so that's sort of direct student support, your faculty support, faculty development funds, faculty chairs, professorships, and then everything else, which is sort of what we call the campus experience. So that includes the athletics, some of the programs. So that's been our focus. Of course, donors can give to anything, and they do, but
Sure.
It's been a really easy message to sell to our alums. They get it because they've lived this small, intimate experience. They're not, if we came and said, we'd like to raise money to, I don't know, we want to start a graduate program, and they would rebel. In fact, they'd be like, no, that's not what K is about. So they
identity of the school is very fixed, and people love it that way. I guess that's true of a lot of more intimate institutions, because I was trying to figure out the scale, and I mentioned Smith College, and Smith is also, I think, 1,600 students. And when there's a discussion about doing something different at particularly the women's colleges historically, that's been an issue, often attributed to gender, which is very important for those schools. But I wonder if part of it's also the scale and the intimacy afforded by having that, that identity.
Yeah.
So it's all women. Sure, it's also women in a certain context, in a certain way, learning a certain way, with certain kinds of professors. And if you mess that up, it kind of changes your relationship to the place as an alum.
Yeah.
So that brings up something else. When you run a campaign for a place like this, like it was for my high school, Interlochen, when you put a new building in or decide to take something out, and naming is one part, which I know sometimes is fraught, but that's essentially an issue for people maybe in development more than others, unless it's a controversial person. But buildings are different, right? So Michigan, years ago, there was a discussion about removing the geography department. I remember it was a huge thing. And now I don't think there's that department anymore. But the idea of repurposing a building or removing a building is a big deal. I would
is.
think it'd be particularly true for a place like this where people are so close to it. So what is the latitude that you have with donors who want to put something new in
So
that way?
that's a great question, and it's appropriate to sort of where we are right now as a campus. So we just, I think this evening, we're taking our campus master plan amendment to the city for its final approval. And we are really looking ahead to not only what the buildings on campus look like in the next decade, but what's happening in those buildings. And it's a pretty big shift, the sort of, where we're thinking. And that's, and I think it's important to talk about the traditions that you could have at any size institution. There are your sacred cows, and then there's the stuff that just kept going because nobody had the will to change it. And I think right now at this institution, we have got a relatively new president. We've got, and his entire cabinet is new within the last 2.5, 3 years.
Wow.
And we're all coming at this with very fresh eyes and asking a lot of why nots. Why couldn't we change that? We're also at a point where our campus infrastructure is old. So we've started these conversations. Our oldest residence hall on campus, which many alums and faculty who are now alums or alums who are now faculty hold very dear, is going to be 100 years old in 2 years. And it looks every bit of it. And so our president last year is sort of just starting to get it into the consciousness of our alumni base, and he likes to say things like our campus is beautiful from a distance.
That's a very careful and thoughtful way of
Yes.
putting it.
And so just starting to ease people into the thought that we are going to start talking about making some changes. We wish we could renovate that 100-year-old hall. It's a bit of a Frankenstein that has been sort of renovated and things have been tacked on over the generations. And it's probably going to come down. I think we've got one faculty member who loves it. And she said she's going to chain herself to it. And he said, well, it's a few years before it comes down. So you'll probably be tired by then. Go for it, so.
Well, this brings up another question too, which is the process that we use for this. So you just said that plan is going to the city. That means you all discussed it first. Who was involved in that discussion? You've got a bunch of fresh eyes at the leadership level here. Obviously, we're very thoughtful about that. Did you involve alumni? Was there a feasibility study from that perspective about how does this jive with the identity of the institution, that sort of thing?
And so we're not that far along yet. Once we actually have the funding, hey, that's my job. Part of that's my job. And know we kind of have a sketch in our plan of where those spaces will be, which is all this master plan amendment will do, is just say, here's a space where we could put a building, and here's the infrastructure that we would need, and here's how this is going to connect. The city is also in the midst of a 5-year infrastructure sort of, Imagine Kalamazoo 2025, trying to make downtown more walkable and the spaces in between places like Western Michigan, which is right next door, and downtown more walkable, pedestrian friendly, and all sorts of things. So we want to integrate into that. So the master plan is really just, we know we're going to need these kinds of buildings. So in that process over the last year, we involved students, we involved faculty and staff. There were focus groups. We involved our surrounding neighborhoods. We're very tucked into this historic neighborhood right up at the top of the hill. And the town-gown relations have not always been the smoothest over the decades. We're in really good shape now because of the college has done a lot of work to engage those folks and keep them in the boat instead of out of the boat. And they are all members of that group are coming out tonight to the city council meeting to support our master plan amendment because we spent time talking to them about it. But I think it's interesting because unlike a lot of small liberal arts schools, K is not in a small town. Some of them are in a small town where there's the college and there's the town and then maybe nothing for 40 miles.
That's so true, right.
And so K is odd in that it is in a small city, and it is also literally right across the street from a major research university. So that happened to get a $550 million gift last year, which did not go unnoticed. So I think there are a lot of folks when they think about town-gown relations with a place like K, they assume K's probably, they're doing their own thing. They're not really involved with the city, or they don't have a whole lot to offer, which is Not true. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, we had our President's Community Breakfast where we invited lawmakers and corporate and foundation leaders just to hear about what's going on at K and what K is doing in the community. Sort of percentage-wise, our college has more students working with nonprofits and with the city and internships and things like that than our neighbor next door. But the numbers are still small at the scale, but far more are involved. I think over the course of a 4-year period, about 2/3 of our students are engaged in some way in internships and projects throughout the city.
So that's such a great model, and I can imagine that is another critical difference between a place like this and UCI, Michigan. You know, pick your a Big Ten university, anything with lots and lots of students. Where I'm thinking about George Washington. There's a university in a city, and occasionally they've bought properties as much as they could buy, and that was successful for them as a university. But I can imagine that kind of thing can become controversial among different parties, whether it's your building next door or somebody else, or maybe even alumni, because it is kind of expanding your footprint and it's changing the economics of the place. But here, it sounds like this is a matter of just making sure you have a strong relationship with the community, which is a very different thing from a large research.
We do have one building on campus that a donor funded for us about 10 years ago. Our Arcus Center for Social Justice Leadership, and it's up at the top of the hill. I don't know if you came in that way. It looks nothing like the rest of campus. And as I understand it, obviously I wasn't here a decade ago, it had some detractors because it does look so foreign to the rest of campus. And our donor, who does a lot of design work, had a hand in sort of kind of what that looks like. So those are always sort of tricky situations. And we've also, our current president has been very clear that, as we think about what campus will look like in the future, it is very much still going to have the character that our alums are used to seeing.
I just want to make sure I wasn't missing any questions out there.
Yes.
If there are questions, don't let me do all the talking. Feel free to let us know if you have a question. One thing I do want to ask you about, which I'm sure people will be interested in knowing, is if you go dig back into your data and research roots, which I know informs much of your thinking about all these things. Again, similarities and differences. Is it just scale, or are there other things?
I would say it's just scale. It's funny. I just met with my executive director of development this morning, who laid out for me. He spent the summer really overhauling our metrics. And I get a little jealous. He left me all these spreadsheets and he's like, oh, I can take those. I was like, no, leave them. I don't get to play with numbers and data that often anymore. And I remember when I got to Michigan, my first task there was to, in creating a prospect development program, was to develop the metrics and all of that. And start to come up with some standards, and those have continued to evolve in the 11 years I was there and in the time since. And so, what is being rolled out to our gift officers now in terms of new metrics is very much based on what's been out in the field now for many years now. It's based on David Lively's work and all of the things that, that he's,
we were talking about him just last Friday. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And for those who haven't seen, because he did a presentation in the Mastermind series, for those who don't know that work, can you kind of summarize? My understanding is instead of 150 to 200 people or so, you'd have 75, but they're much better, not just qualified, but you're going to explain it far better than I would.
Well, I hope. And David, if you're listening, I'm sorry if I butcher. But really the focus has been to, and we had been doing this at Michigan in the years right before I left there as well, was scaling back portfolios significantly and really understanding how gift officers are evaluated is often sort of leads to a more is more mentality, at least it did in the past, and ways to sort of game the numbers. Just because that's what you were being evaluated on. How many visits did I get in this? And, how many asks did I get, even if they weren't real? And, so it really, and volume seemed to be sort of the name of the game. And with the work that David's been rolling out for the last many, many years now, I mean, it's probably a decade or more, really thinking about what can a gift officer realistically do in a year that will keep them focused and produce results and incentivize the right behaviors. So a lot of that work then is about working with gift officers to trim the portfolios down to those folks who they really have actual moves that they can accomplish in a year. And then having a broader pool of qualification or discovery folks that when it's time for the next infusion, that they're pulling those folks in. I also had the opportunity when I was at UC Irvine to work with Plus Delta Partners on their discipline of frontline fundraising program, which we put all of the gift officers there through before we launched our campaign. And that is also very heavily focused on moving the process along and qualifying people in as robustly or out as robustly as you're qualifying them in, so that you're having this continual pool. Especially you think about a place like Michigan, when they have hundreds of thousands of folks they could be pulling into the pool. If you just pull them into your portfolio and they sit there, either A, they're not getting the attention that they need, or B, they're just taking up space that could be, be like, oh, I can't take on anymore, my portfolio is full. So teaching gift officers how to disqualify as well as qualify. And then thinking about, based on the level of seniority of that gift officer, whether or not they have management responsibilities in addition to their road warrior activities, right. And whether they're sort of in the, at Michigan, it was sort of the flavors of, are they in the corporate foundation space, and how do those look different from individual major gift officers? And coming up with what I think David calls the placemat. We now have our placemat here at K now. It's very petite and cute, but it's got very good numbers on it that we're really excited. And the gift officers actually like, right. I understand this. I can work to this.
Did you have to make some significant adjustments in order to get there? Because I know it's been 2 years for you, but it sounds like a long time, but it's really not. So did you have a huge number of people that you wanted to kind of refocus attention, and did you use tools to do that?
So we lost some folks during the great, whatever you want to call it, the great reshuffle, the great whatever, right. Because we were a campus that we expected everybody to come back in person. And so I did 2 of the 5 gift officer positions I had. Decided to take other opportunities, mm-hmm. which was fine. So that actually gave us some opportunity to really think about who would be the people filling those positions and what skills do we want them to bring to the table. And because of the salaries that we offer, we were able to hire in 2 great folks with transferable skills from within the advancement world, but who were not major gifts folks, who are going like gangbusters just in the first 9 months that they've been here. So we're really excited about that. We made sure this was even at Michigan, where we had many more resources. We were often in a position where we had to train our own. And so that's a mentality that is, I'm not going to get somebody with 10 years experience with the salary level that we can offer. And so who are our rising stars and who can we bring into the profession? There weren't a whole lot of changes. There weren't a lot of behaviors necessarily that we were looking to curb. I think it was more just about providing focus, particularly with 2 new gift officers, to help them, rather than letting them sort of, here's 150 folks, see what you can do with that. It was right. Like, hey, how about I give you 50 to 75, and that's going to be, and we're going to work, my executive director, who is their direct supervisor, mm-hmm. is then working with them through that process. Who are you qualifying? Who are you going to engage? Who are you asking this year? And you don't have to look through 150 people to figure out who that is. It sounds
a lot less painful, because the idea of having this volume of, for you too, mm-hmm. if everything in the end, is a lot more volume of data, mm-hmm. and as much as we like data, if there's much more of it, it is more difficult to discern where are the most meaningful elements. Where's the noise and where's the...
Yes, because there are always going to be those donors and alums who are happy to take a meeting, happy to have lunch, happy to have drinks, happy to have coffee, and are never going to move to the next level. Right. And I think when a gift officer is like, oh, I got time to fill, let me reach out to Betty and Joe because they will always take a meeting. And then that's a metric that I've filled. Trying to take the Bettys and the Joes out of the portfolio so there's not that temptation to sort of pad that activity. If I'm needing if I don't have anything robust, then I need to start doing some qualification, and I need to get some new names that I need to go out.
Well, I did want to ask you about that too, because again, you have a big history in that research vein too. So what kind of research department do you have here in terms of numbers and that sort of thing? I mean, is that also scalable? Because we've both heard organizations that have the $5,000 budget and places that have the $200,000 budget for research, and some that have one researcher that's serving essentially 30 staff, and other places where they have 25 people. And so is that also a scalable element? How have you managed to address that here?
So I'm still largely working with the team that I inherited when I started here. I did a little bit of reshuffling when we had some attrition last year in 2021. We have one researcher here, and for those 5 gift officers, and her supervisor, who oversees sort of the prospect development program, who has worked very closely then with those and she used to be the researcher, and then she added one, but now her responsibilities have grown. So that is still an area of opportunity, but I would say that right now, with the volume that is coming through our major gifts team, and I think we're doing well. That's always an area. I think we're fine on the research side. I think as we think about prospect development, I would love to have another staff who is solely focused on helping sort of manage traffic, if you will. We are also in the midst of a CRM implementation that has taken a little bit longer than it should have.
Have you chosen? Are you able to say who it is?
Oh no, we're implementing Slate, which I didn't even know Slate had an advancement module when I got here. I was like, who? What? You mean Slate, like admissions, enrollment management Slate? But they do. It's one of the newer players on the market, and I've been in challenges with sort of new to the market tools before. I mean, Michigan, where we implemented Blackbaud CRM many years ago, was, at the time, we were, I think, the 4th
SaaS implementation.
Yeah. So I've sort of lived through that pain. We're going through a little bit of that now, just as Slate is realizing that enrollment and advancement are not the same, and so it's not a one-to-one corollary. And I think that they've heard that from many of their clients who have been implementing it over the last couple of years. So I mean, we're trying to build, we're ripe at the opportunity right now. We're building a gift officer portal that is building some of these new metrics into it. So the timing is good there, but we should have been live a little bit ago.
I do see that there are a couple of questions here. So depending upon what they are, and if we've covered them already, if we have, I'm sorry, we didn't read yours out. And let me see. This question we get every single time: is there going to be recording? Yes, it's being recorded right now. And that's being passed on to YouTube, and it'll also be available under the resources tab at DonorSearch.net. So do look for this there and share it with your colleagues who could not be here live with us. You were asking if, let me see, Allison was asking, is it possible to learn more about what a metric system should focus on? That might be a matter of scale too. Can you talk a bit about metrics?
So the new metrics that I'm so glad I just had this meeting earlier this morning where I had my little refresher, but certainly visit activity is still going to be a focus. But the primary metric is going to be gifts closed and gifts solicited, because that's the end game. I mean, I think it's great to talk about engagement and all of that, those things through the donor cycle. But at the end of the day, our major gift officers, what we hire them for is to bring in philanthropic support to the college, preferably at the major gift level. That's the level of the gift is the part they have the least amount of control over, but they do have control over how many they ask and what they ask for. At Michigan, at UC Irvine, and here, the data has shown me repeatedly that if you set a threshold for what a major gift is, that's going to be your most common ask, regardless of if it's the right ask for that individual, because that's the entry point. Well, if it's $100,000, your most common ask is $100,000. Even if that's a $250,000 or $500,000 donor, they're more likely to get asked for $100,000 off the bat. The same thing happened when I did that analysis when I was at UC Irvine. And so sometimes you kind of got to get out of their heads a little bit of that. So gift officers can't control what the close amount is, but they can control what the ask amount is. So we're looking at things like that. We're certainly looking at overall visits, but we're looking specifically at have a metric around qualification visits, because we have to be continually refilling the pipeline. And I want to say that certainly I know for some gift officers, I've met a few gift officers in my lifetime. They're like unicorns who love doing discovery calls.
I love discovery calls.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not always the most efficient thing, but boy, you learn so much, especially
Yeah.
for the people that might have resources and have never been engaged.
Yeah.
So
I've had gift officers in the past at other institutions say, could we just hire somebody just to do the discovery and pass the names on? I'm like, who wants that job, right?
no,
But it has come up many times, and some schools do have them and they're successful. I think Arizona, or I can't remember which of the Arizonas had such a program in place. At least they did several years ago. But we have, and that's probably been one of the biggest issues here at K, is we keep going back to the same well over and over, and they've been open to the conversation, but there's so many more folks that we haven't gotten to. And we're realizing that in this campaign is that, we took a little bit of hit for time when we weren't out on the road visiting with folks. And so even having those conversations about, do we extend the campaign? Because we've got a lot of momentum and a lot of people we haven't talked to yet. So
wow, that's so interesting. You even talked about that with Michigan, and then you said, well, they'll have another campaign that addresses the problem. But I always think about that, the 600,000, whatever it is, alumni there. Again, it's the same issue at any institution, regardless of size. There are a lot of people who you can't talk to every single person.
Right.
But then those people might be wondering, why hasn't anybody talked to me? And how you address that issue.
Yeah. That breaks my heart every time I hear somebody who's asked by a classmate or something why they don't participate, and they're like, I've never been asked. And then you're like, oh, we missed one. Oh, we got to get in there, so, and sometimes it's too late. Sometimes they've, developed other philanthropic priorities.
So what is looking more broadly, what I'm relying on your recipe for this, because
I don't have a recipe.
This is the problem everybody's encountering, right? Is that we get better and better and better at the top. And you've seen that in all these places, and done it so well. But then we have all these people kind of in the middle.
Yep.
And we've seen the latest numbers. In fact, there were new numbers that just came out again, I think in the last 24 hours from Fundraising Effectiveness Project saying, the numbers are down for retention, the numbers are down for this. I don't know that that's our fault. I don't know that it's not our fault.
Yeah, I don't know.
But how can we address it when, you have to make your goal. You've got the staff you have. You could scale it according to the campaign size. But how much of the thought, as you think about this, as institutions think about this, is what's happening to the middle donor?
Yeah. And I don't know that I didn't solve that at Michigan. I wasn't at UC Irvine long enough to really dig into it with that team. But we talked about it quite a bit during my time at Michigan. And I think here at K, we've got more room to dig a little deeper into the at least the next tier, whether it addresses the full middle, because we used to call it, we do our pyramids, and we'd always talk about our fat middle,
Right.
And because I think once, I had a consultant say, it's not really a pyramid, it's kind of this weird curvy thing that's got this big bulge in the middle, that where you have a lot of opportunity, but you don't have the resources to address that.
Yeah,
And
we need a Heimlich maneuver for development.
Right. Up them up to the top. But what I would say here at K is, over the many decades, is that we're in a very philanthropic community. And one of the lures of me coming here was knowing what a philanthropic area this is, West Michigan in general, and Kalamazoo in particular. The college has historically sort of relied on those handful of community resources. So what we've done in this campaign already, that we were really happy to be able to share with our board, was that we've already broadened our footprint significantly with this campaign. I think in the college's last campaign, which ended maybe about 6-7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, the number of donors at the $1 million+ level, we've more than tripled that since that. So it just, because we had so much reliance on a handful of folks who gave transformation, sort of really principal level gifts, and then everything else was kind of trickled down. So our thing has gone from this really narrow wedge at the top. We've started to do this. So for me, that's a sign of success.
It's almost like opening the door to some of these other folks.
Yeah.
And
we've
still
had
doing it in a way that makes economic sense, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow. What are you hearing from the donors as you have that conversation with them? Because I'm sure some people, like you said, some people say, well, nobody approached me, but I'm sure that you're having conversations with lots of different donors today. alumni walking across the campus, people's parents. What's their interaction with your office like today? And how is it different maybe from when you started? Do you sense a difference in the donor relationship at all? Are we doing our work
When I
better?
started in the field, you mean, or what? Oh,
Yeah.
well, I wasn't working on the front line before, so I only had sort of a secondhand, really understanding of what that looked and felt like. So I'm not really sure that I can speak to how it might be different. I honestly don't think that's changed that much. The folks, you're always going to have folks who believe that their giving gives them greater access than it actually does. But I also am blessed here with a president who he's happy to meet with anybody. And in fact, I've had to kind of claw him back a few times and like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to put you in a one-on-one meeting with a donor at this level. If they start to move up and they're ready, in a group setting, sure, absolutely. But, I said an engagement with the president should feel a little special. He's very egalitarian. He wants everybody in the boat, which is great and lovely. But I think it should still feel like a special thing. And so
it is special.
Yeah. So he will go all over the country and meet with alumni and small groups, and he's happy to do that. He believes in alumni engagement for alumni engagement's sake, just because he knows there's potential maybe further down the line. But then I have to say, but we're not going to have individual lunches and dinners with all of these folks. We're going to handpick a few of those where we think you could help move a gift discussion that's underway along, that sort of thing. And so he's a great fundraiser, but he just will ask anybody. And so sometimes we have to save it up.
Direct his energy to the best opportunities for him.
Yes.
And we have another couple here. So first of all, thank you for these questions. If you have another one, do shoot it along. From Anonymous. It always worries me when I see Anonymous because they show up at every session and I still don't know who they are. I assume your school has a longstanding legacy giving program. Did you adjust or change much in that program when it was handed? This is an eye test. When it was handed over to you, do you have any general advice about debuting legacy giving to longtime donor prospects?
Oh, that's a great question. It's interesting because we have a legacy giving society, the Stetson Society, which I think has waxed and waned since its inception. And one of the focuses of our current campaign has been to increase our number of legacy donors or folks making legacy commitments to the college and joining the Stetson Society. In our last campaign, I think that campaign total, only about 7% of that campaign total was in planned, any kind of deferred gifts. Our target and where we are, in fact, at this time in this campaign is more like 25, 26%, which is pretty standard. And certainly that's been the case when I was at Michigan or UCI. That was kind of what we assumed about a quarter of the campaign would be in deferred gifts. We had some trustees actually push back on that because they're like, we need cash in the door. We're like, yes, but we also need to be looking to the future. And so part of the strategy, which was new, is very common, but was new to K when we launched this campaign, was having that multi-part ask. And so they were being asked for a major outright gift, an annual fund gift over a period of time, and an estate gift.
Okay, I have to ask you a follow-up on that, which is that one of the things I run into when I'm doing consulting work is the fear that a campaign will depress annual support.
Well, our annual support has only continued to grow over the life of the campaign. Modest growth, but we've broken a record every year in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And it's because we've been talking about the annual giving in the context of the campaign, which in some cases I've seen annual giving teams who brand their annual giving stuff so robustly that they feel like, oh, this campaign laying on top of that is just going to distract folks from the message, or it's so strongly branded we couldn't possibly talk about the campaign in the same I was like, yeah, it's another layer. I think we've done a very good job of that here at K and rolling that in. I made that very clear, where I had the ability to say, we will be doing this, where I didn't necessarily at a previous institution.
But I guess as a model,
Yeah.
you've seen that it works here, and I've heard that before.
Yeah.
That if you wrap these things together, it gives a donor an opportunity to help you today and help you tomorrow.
Yeah.
If they really love the place and they love the program, then why
Yes.
not? Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And then Scott had asked, how do your gift officers divide their time? And if you didn't have a researcher, how would that change their schedule?
That's a great question. I'm not sure that I'm in the day-to-day of our gift officers well enough to know. I will talk about that in a minute too. But I would say that they probably spend most of their time sort of, it's a tripartite, and it changed over the course of the pandemic. I think the pandemic, from my executive director's perspective, actually they had some of we had some of our most successful fundraising ever in 2020, 2021. And it was not focused towards giving towards COVID related things. It was just, giving to campaign related priorities. But people were sitting at home with lots of disposable income at their fingertips. But just realizing they could be more efficient. So they are road warriors. And yet we learned we can do a lot of really effective fundraising over video call, over phone call, over email. And that's how we had to do it. And I think 5 years ago, we would have been like, that's crazy. There's no way you can raise major and principal gifts that way. And for some donors who are like, you know what, let's wait till we're back and can get back in person again and we'll talk. But for a lot of them, they were like, sure. I mean, my first year here, I, closed a $5 million gift over email, which is, so just that realization that there's more than one way to skin a cat. So thinking about, I don't have to, yes, they are on the road and they're traveling, and they're doing both discovery and cultivation, solicitation work on the road. But sometimes they're going to a meeting, and instead of saying, okay, I met with that donor, I know what their interests are, and now I've got to wait till I have time to go back and see them again to go close this gift. No, you don't. You could have a video call. You can do that via email. You can do that via phone call. But I think that there was just that mindset, well, if I got to be on the road, I got to be on the road. And so I need to fill that time with travel and all this. And when you're not always on the road, you actually have time to develop more interesting proposals for your, for your donors. And so I think they're just learning to be more efficient in the way they engage those donors and realizing they have multiple ways of being successful. And I say that given the fact that some of our gift officers are really like, I love to travel, get me out, so sure. I think 2020, 21 was rough in terms of they did great, but in ways that I think they didn't realize they could do. But as soon as the shackles were off, they were out.
They were out. Well, and that kind of goes to this metrics thing and something you talked about earlier, the way that people were having lots of meetings, not here, not the places you've been, but in the field in general. They had lots of meetings, and so we counted the meetings, and some of the meetings, were they really meetings or not? But what you're talking about here is that video call was a substantial conversation.
Right.
It was a move,
right?
In the old language. So my question is, do you think that as a profession that we're going to be able to sustain that approach, or are people going back to what they did before?
I think if we're doing it right, it's a mix. It should and I think it could have been a mix before. We just didn't realize that would work. I think there are plenty of donors who are more than happy to engage in this way. Now that we all know how to use this technology to some degree, I think there was just a hesitation, and it wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now. So, and it has allowed us to reach folks who we were never, ever going to get on a plane to go see. For that one donor in Montana or Utah or somewhere where we don't have there's not a lot of density to validate buying a plane ticket and flying across the country. If the dollars get big enough, then you're going to want to try to find a way to get in front of them, either bringing them back to campus or going to visit them. But if you're working on a lovely garden variety major gift, as those garden variety, that was a term that one of my colleagues at Michigan came up with.
I've used that too.
A lot of times these other methods, which we learned out of necessity during the pandemic, still work today. So
yeah, absolutely. And plus maybe it adjusts for that fat pyramid, right? Because if you're going to go to Idaho and there's only one person there, then you've had that meeting, that's terrific, but you've kind of reinforced the earlier issue. But if you have 15 people spread around, and you can talk to them all on a video call, and then bring them in a little bit closer, and then have meetings as appropriate. Now you've saved money, you've seen more people, leaned it down.
So I don't know about the researchers and how that would change their schedule. Obviously, if they didn't have that access, they would have to spend a lot more time doing their own research to figure out, what are our touch points and best ways to engage these folks.
I don't know if you have a general thought on whether or not the research has gotten easier or more difficult. I mean, we have a lot of tools at our disposal now. And over at DonorSearch, they're doing a lot with AI, for example. But there's also in the wind discussion about, for example, privacy and how that might impact research in the future. So do you imagine that things are just going to keep going kind of like they're going, or?
I think I don't see any big changes just yet. I mean, certainly if you look at what happened in the UK with their new privacy laws, I mean, that kind of tamped things down. And I'll be really honest with you, as I have been the beneficiary of research and going out and meeting with donors over the last 2 years, the things that I find most valuable in going into those conversations is what has our interactions with them been. I mean, yes, you want to know at a high level what they do for a living and kind of some key family relationships, but the things that have generated the most valuable parts of the conversations are not about what they do for a living, because that often, if you're doing it right, that's going to come up in the conversation. But it's been like, what is our engagement been with them? What have we captured? So AI, having that suss out of past contact reports and other things like that, I think that's harder to think about AI taking over that. And the gift officers who we want to be in front of donors as often as possible, virtually or otherwise, I would prefer they obviously not be spending all of their time having to do all of that background research. So if somebody can at least give them a jumping off point. Right. Because they're part of the research picture too. So.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Okay, so maybe just another couple of quick ones, and then maybe we'll wrap, because I know it's already 1 hour. We were being asked if you're using DonorSearch. You don't have to answer that, but you can if you want.
I do not, no.
Okay. But it's safe to say that you use a lot of research tools here.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got our LexisNexis and all that gets, all of the,
So general endorsement for using research services, very important to do.
You will never hear me not say that.
I can't imagine you saying anything other than that. Again, for people who are just meeting you, you've really been an inspiring force in this field for a lot of people, for myself included.
Thank you.
You've brought a lot of discipline to this, but you've always maintained that connection to, that deep root into prospect development, prospect research, and tied that to that relationship. Like you just said, you go out and you listen to the person, you find out what really matters to them, how are they engaged? Yeah. And it seems like often development in the past has been either one thing or the other. It's like two sides of the brain that never communicate, and you've always brought those together in a way that's been very beneficial to our field. Could Karen elaborate on the placemat?
Well, now you need to get David back in here, but so I'm not an expert on the placemat, but essentially it's just a big grid, and we took the placemat, that's what David calls it, that he did at Northwestern, as he was starting to roll out this new way of thinking about gift officer metrics, is really just breaking down what are the key metrics sort of on one axis, and then on the other, what are the sort of the different levels of fundraising professional, and what are the goals that at each of those levels they're expected to attain. So ours is very simple. It's just got, 3 different levels. It's got my AVP. I'm sorry, I've been calling him an executive director I just forgot. He just got a promotion last month.
If he's here, forgive her.
Sorry, Andy. It's only a few weeks in. So it's got his metrics as an AVP, which of course he also has sort of departmental administrative responsibilities as well as management responsibilities. So his numbers look little bit different than, say, our senior associate director, who is a true, sort of senior road warrior, has a mature portfolio. And then we've got 2 right now. Got 1 open position, but 2 of our new gift officers who started earlier this year at the assistant director level. And because they are new, because they are still developing relationships and their portfolio portfolios are still being built out, their expectations for what they would achieve in terms of their asks and visits and all that in the year looks different from what that senior associate director would do, looks different from what that AVP would be expected to do. And the AVP is expected to raise more money, even though he's got a smaller portfolio, because he tends to have more mature principal gift level donors. Somewhere in the middle for that senior associate director, and then the two assistant directors would probably be, actually maybe be more on the qualification side, but wouldn't be expected necessarily to come in with the same level of dollars.
Do you have the president and board members in there too?
We are not, and myself, we are not in the placemat. We could place us in the placemat. And we've talked about, whether or not that makes sense. The presidents in my portfolio pretty much overlap. One of the things, and that's sort of been historic, one of the things I'm hoping to do over time is to build my own portfolio outside of the president as well, some of whom might rise to that level. But one of the things I wanted to mention earlier, and I know we're at the end of our time, but what I expected intellectually but didn't really understand is how much being in a vice president role is different from being fully immersed in advancement, because I'm also an executive officer of the college, which means I'm involved in a lot of things that have absolutely nothing to do with advancement. And so it's been a great education, but it is a great bifurcation of time. And because I also oversee marketing communications, the last couple of years has been a lot of crisis communications and working with that team and working with the president's staff. So there, I would say my piece of the pie would look even smaller, although with some of the donors that are in my portfolio, the numbers at the end of the day hopefully will be bigger, even though so yeah.
Sure. I mean, that's again, this, I know pyramids are never the right analogy for all of this, but for people at these roles and above, you have a smaller portfolio with very important prospects.
Yeah.
There's a question no one's asking, but I think it's really important to ask, which is that you come from a different kind of trajectory in comparison to, let's say, a lot of members of AASP or APRA. But there are others who are trying to navigate their professional life. This is an unfair question, but do you have any recommendations or advice for people? What do you, in kind of a mentoring capacity, which I'm sure you've done, how do you talk to people about how they might want to consider moving forward if they're in one of those pockets of research or prospect development, and they're thinking about, how do I grow? How do I become like Karen?
Sorry. It's interesting because, when I first became, so my first job, advancement related job was was researcher for the Chicago Symphony. So I started out as a researcher, the only researcher at the institution. So I've been there. And at that time, back in the 90s, it was far more common for folks coming out of prospect development roles to move into major gifts or VP roles. And then as the field became more and more specialized and more data heavy, you sort of had all of this specialization happening. And so different parts of prospect development attracted different folks with different kinds of skill sets. And throughout the course of my career, I've always been sort of straddling, because I do love data. And I often lament that I don't get to spend time doing the kinds of things that I used to do. But at every sort of fork in the road, I had to make a choice. Do I move further into advancement operations, into advancement services, or do I want to, I'm kind of liking some of the stuff that I'm seeing and getting to do that is close related to the front line. And so, all of us navigate our, the opportunities that are in front of us. And so sometimes you just follow the next thing that's in front of you. I think where I got to the point after enough time at Michigan was I realized I had taken the next opportunity, and I loved the work and I loved my teams and all of that. But the thing that I wanted to do was over here. And I also realized that that wasn't going to happen while I stayed at Michigan. So, and as someone who is a avowed homebody, making the decision to leave there was a very difficult one. But as I looked at the strengths that I brought and understanding how major gifts works very, very well, and understanding how the data and technology end of things worked very well. I knew that an opportunity to combine those things might be in campaign administration. So hence I said, I want to be a campaign director. And that's how I ended up at UC Irvine. I learned a lot there. It was an amazing experience. I was really proud of the work that I did with that campus, all those deans and administrators and trustees and all of that to launch that $2 billion campaign. But it was, and I think I thought I'd be there for some period of time. And then at some point along the line, I was like, I think I want to run my own shop, because I want to be able to, I'd worked with enough leaders, amazing and sometimes otherwise, to be able to say, I have some ideas that I would like to be able to put into play, and I'm not at the level that I can do that. And I thought it would be several more years before I would be quote unquote ready for that. And in fact, a lot of headhunters were telling me, yeah, you're not quite ready because you've never been a major gift officer. And I was like, what am I supposed to go back up and start over again? And so, when this opportunity at K came along, and I had a chance to talk to my president, and he said, well, and I shared this with him, and he said, well, that seems crazy. He's like, I'm the president of this college. I've never been a vice president for advancement. I've never been a VP for enrollment. I've never been a head of dean of students. I've been a provost, but that's about it, and a faculty member. I've never been a CFO. And somehow they still hired me to run the college, because I was able to hire the right people in the, smart and talented people to do their jobs, and then trust them to do that and teach me along the way. And he said, and I don't see why you couldn't do that in leading this advancement team. And so that was the first time that I'd actually heard someone other than a colleague who was like, oh, you totally should be doing this, say those words to me. Someone who was a leader who had the power to say yay or nay, say, well, that seems crazy. That doesn't make any sense. And so that was like just a great, even if I hadn't gotten this opportunity to have had him say that to me, helped me understand the value that I, of course, even without that, 20 years as a major gift officer background, could bring to a role like this. And the good thing is I seem to be okay at raising major gifts too. So
right. It sounds like it's a lot more than validation, because it was also an invitation to do the things both that you wanted to do, you knew you could do, and somebody else had the vision to see that you could do them here.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Awesome.
There are sessions this week you're not going to want to miss that echo some of this, and other people that we kind of name checked. We'll find a way to get a link to that David Lively session, or see if we can invite him back. He's a brilliant guy. Also, Julie Yurko. I don't know if you know Julie.
Yes.
So who was at the Chicago Symphony, maybe back around that time.
She hired me.
And she was also president of APRA at one point. She is going to be, she's now the CEO at the Northern Illinois, I think, Food Bank. And she's going to be in the series later on this month. So
wonderful.
I hope you'll watch for that. Yes, that'll be great to see her. Yeah. We also have some other sessions coming up just this week. One with Pat McDowell tomorrow. And that is at 3:30. And then on Wednesday, we have a session. We've been talking about engagement a lot today. This is a person who was at Harvard, and then an engagement, and then she moved over to the University of Oxford in engagement. So she'll be talking with us about all of that work right now from over there across the pond. That's on Wednesday at noon. So I hope you'll join us for some of that, but nothing will be like sitting down with Karen Isble. So thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you, Jay. It's been a pleasure. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Make sure to take a look for this video over there at the DonorSearch site, which is at donorsearch.net. See you next time. Take care. If I can find out how to turn this off.